Hi, and welcome to the Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson. Today, for the Spooky Hours podcast, we're talking to a podcaster, filmmaker, and writer, Kristian Lander. How are you, Kristian?
I'm very well, thank you, David. Very well to
Uh,
see you. Thank you.
I hope you're keeping warm and dry. It's a very wet day at the moment. Where is it? What's the weather like where you are?
So I'm in Nottingham, so I'm in the City of Legends, and outside of my window, I can see here it's just that kind of grey, overcast sky. It was certainly cold last night to the point where it froze over, but no, it's generally okay. Proper British weather.
Well, it sounds like that in London because I'm looking at it and it's very, very dreary. I wanted to go out for a walk, but no, not today. Now, we were talking just before we started this conversation or podcast about methods that people use for investigations. Now, we've both been doing this for a very long time, and we probably have different views about stuff. But what's maybe the most interesting thing you've seen as an investigator, and I'm talking maybe possibly a bit crazy? What have you seen people do that you think, what the heck are they doing?
You've caught me off guard there. But so the most craziest thing I ever saw, I think I went to Tatton Hall, and I saw a group of people using a human Ouija board.
A
So
human
they
one.
a human one. So they had these using chalk. They put out the letters on the floor, and they had a person. That they weren't a medium. They were basically one of the guests who came along, and then the medium was kind of lightly touching their shoulders, and they were kind of sort of guiding them across the letters on the floor. That was perhaps the most weirdest one. Again, a similar location. I saw like human pendulum, I think they call it, and that's kind of a similar thing where they were kind of using the human as the kind of guide on the floor.
I suppose
Like
people do table tapping, but sort of they're closer, aren't they? And whereas this, I don't know how would you do how would you do that? How did they do it? How did they do the Ouija board
well, so
with lots of people?
so the medium was stood behind the guest, should we say, with their fingers on their shoulders, and someone asked the question, and they kind of guided them around the chalk markings, letters on the floor.
Okay, and what did they find? Did you wait long enough to find out what the result of that communication was?
I did, and the person, it was like, "Who are you?" And this person came back. Their name was Paul. But you know what happens when you say the first letter and the second letter? Suddenly, you could see that there was a speed transition. You kind of knew what letter to go to next. So it adds that psychological level that it says, well, it's obvious where we're going now, so I can get there a bit quicker. We can get to perhaps the next question. I can be more involved. So there's this kind of interesting psychological level that's going on at the same time.
It doesn't sound like you're quite convinced by these things. Then
I
maybe
was
Ouija
not.
boards,
No,
or what do you think of Ouija boards in general?
I think they're a really interesting tool psychologically, actually, to perhaps
Okay,
how to watch people. And I think we've all perhaps seen Penn and Teller's famous episode where they did the bullshit Ouija board, where what they'd
okay.
done, they got this group of people in Las Vegas who were very dedicated to the craft of using a Ouija board, and they blindfolded everybody. But then before they started reading out their messages, they turned the board 90 degrees, so the letters weren't in the positions that they were. And when I saw that, I was like, there's something going on here. If the spirit was present, the spirit would know that the board has changed. So it was that point I was like, what is really going on here? And when you put it down to the human level, there is this psychological level that's really going on.
So you almost got the human being is in the way of any messaging that might be going on.
Yeah, it's interesting because people do claim really bizarre messages and really kind of grounded messages that can, in some ways, give a level of support, of kindness, of endurance from the other side, and it kind of puts like a little tool in the way that everyone else can see that going on. So you're not if we assume that spirits are there and we have a human element there, and that's the medium. Effectively, what you're doing, you're showing and demonstrating that everyone else can now see what the medium is doing, and that's done by a Ouija board or a pendulum or some kind of device. That it almost becomes like a public spectacle of the messaging process.
Yeah. So what do you think is, like, from your experience as an investigator over the years? What would you do when you go out doing investigations?
I really do try to keep it simple. I'll take pen, paper, notepad. I'll generally keep my thoughts to myself. If I've got a group around me, we generally have already agreed on doing that. So whatever thoughts and whatever feelings, whatever kind of um not senses, but you kind of the kind of notes that you would kind of make to yourself, and then when you come back together afterwards, you can then compare them to see how that balanced out, or how that kind of, did you see this? Did I see that too? Was I impressed by this? What was that notice on the board? Was that like kind of a signal that was given a different impression there? Sure, we take cameras, we take a sound recorder, but that's more about documenting what it is that you are there for, as opposed to, I'm using this as a tool to find a ghost or record a ghost. I'm actually using the sound recorder to record essentially my notes and the environment, not for the purposes of EVP. And I just try to keep my tool set simple. That way that the person you're talking to knows that you're coming at it from a perspective that is more grounded, more agnostic, certainly a position where you're not influencing them and they're not influencing you. You're just trying to keep it on a level that it's more fact-based, more grounded. And I think the people you are talking to, that gives them a sense that actually this person, is willing to listen, but not be influenced by their own preconceptions beforehand.
I think that's right. You often hear, well, I've often been told, like when you do these things, the medium doesn't want to know anything before they go in, because they don't want to be affected by, if you said, Dick Turpin or someone is supposed to haunt this pub or whatever it might be, they don't want to know about it because it affects them. But I suppose it would happen if you're standing around and going, can you smell that? And they go, oh yeah, I can smell that. Whereas you're saying, keep your mouth shut and just write your notes, and then you can talk about it afterwards.
Yeah, I think that helps validate. That kind of gives it almost a level of again, I use the word validate. Because if I smelt that, did you smell that? It's kind of a case of listening to your thoughts, listen to your impressions, what you're getting from that environment, from that space, or perhaps the relationship of the people who are there. How are you reading them? And then it allows you to kind of have a bit more objectivity when it comes to your notes and your final documents, putting them together.
So, what's been your most recent sort of bit of investigation or visit to a spooky place?
Okay, so how do there's been a couple of ASAP investigations that I've done that aren't public, but in terms of I'll share out a story, but I'll filter the details from it away from you.
That's all right.
But it was a young person, and this young person. So the parents actually got in contact.
So this is a private investigation. That's why you're a bit umming and ahhing about it, because it's a private investigation. Okay.
Yes. So, in terms of what the elements of the investigation are really interesting. So that but we can definitely talk about those. So we had a couple of parents come to us, and they were like, "Hey, I see something in my house, and it appears to be a figure that has these proportions, and I now think my daughter is seeing it too." So went to visit this property, had a chat with this lady, and then there's her husband, and they had some interesting predilections about what this character was, what they did, where they went in their house, and the actions that this entity performs. And then we met the child, and what was really different here compared to most other cases, the child's perspective of what they were seeing was something completely different, to the point that the parents started breaking down crying. They had no idea of the level of interaction and beings, shall we say, that this child was seeing. To the point that where this child, I think in the investigation notes, I listed it as G1 to G8. It's Ghost 1, Ghost 2, Ghost 3. And this child was going through what these characters did and positions they were at home, when they were out, when they were at a school.
Can you maybe explain that key, the G1 to G8?
Yeah, so basically I use that as a reference to what is the Ghost 1, for instance. What is the first ghost that this child claims that they are seeing, and what the characteristics were. So we called it G1, and over the course of this conversation, there was 8 entities that this child had said.
Okay.
And then you think, well, why? And these parents were really upset. They had no idea.
So they thought they saw something, and the child might have saw something, but the child clearly saw huge amounts more than the parents had.
That's it. And what was more interesting is the child did not identify the one thing that the parents believed what it was.
Can I ask how old the child was?
Child was 11.
Okay, so not a little toddler, not a little kid.
Yeah.
What did you speak to the child much?
Yeah, so obviously within the there was a kitchen table, as it were, and myself, my fellow investigator, and the parent and the child were there. And the child was very clear, very well spoken, very clear about what was going on. But they also had very clear rules about what these ghosts did, and that was a kind of a key to what the investigation, how it led. These ghosts appeared to adhere to her rules, so it's like a case of, okay, so what is really going on here? I mean, a couple of the entities, shall we say, one appeared to, she described a figure who was more than 8 feet tall would appear in the kitchen, and she says, "Oh, he's about that tall up there. It's a tall white figure, and he just stands there. And he's in here every so often." But what was actually the case, there was a skylight, and I noticed over the course of the afternoon, as the sun came over, it actually created a shaft of light. So I think what the child was actually doing was impressing upon what that could be. And they did say they have been watching haunted videos on YouTube. They've been watching ghost videos. They've been watching Doctor Who. So you kind of was like they have a very active imagination at that age. And a lot of these 8 entities that this child described all had that kind of manifestation. They were in one place at one time doing one action. And that was... And that when we were discussing those about what she thought they were, why did these entities abide by those rules? It was very clear that she was like impressed by social media, very much impressed by YouTube. And again, Doctor Who was mentioned a number of times, and that you could see the kind of the emotion change in the parents. They went from being a wonderful situation to being a highly emotive, fear-based, "Oh my god, my child has seen XYZ, and I'm so scared for this person," to them being, "Oh, actually, you know what? They're not. They're being impressed by their environment," and that put them instantly at ease. It was almost like watching a journey of a person who was a parent go through this kind of a tragedy of a story to being, "You know what? Actually, it's okay. My child is fine. They clearly have an active imagination, and they were just upset and scared." And
so they thought she saw something, but then they soon realised, as you did, that she was not necessarily making up, just basically saw this stuff on the television and thought that ray of light was something, but it's clearly explainable.
Like the stairs creaked at night, for instance. So what was happening is the child basically had a fear about going upstairs because the stairs would creak during the day, and then she thought that there was somebody on there. There was a moment where she thought there was someone standing at the bathroom door when she would leave at night. Instead of going to the bathroom, she wouldn't want to go there because
she's watched too many videos and she's given herself the scares.
Yeah. But what actually was the case is that on the bedroom, on the landing didn't have any carpet. It was just a kind of the wooden slat beams, and actually there was a gap in between every slat on the floor, so you can actually see down into the darkness, basically. And that actually was what was scaring the child. So I was like, okay, what we do then? And Dad basically was like kind of a biker type guy, and he clearly had tools, and he had like lots of things in the house. And she says, I said, what would make that go away? And she's like, well, Dad's got some duct tape. Duct tape, that's a great idea. Let's go get Dad's duct tape. And then we covered these holes in the floor. And after that, wonderful, no problem at all. Go to the bathroom at night, no issue. So when you apply the kind of the sensible, grounded rules to a situation, and situation resolved.
Yeah. I want to get back to that a little bit, just some of the ideas that maybe the child had, what they'd seen on television and, in media, and we'll talk about that a little bit later because I'm interested in your thoughts on that. But can you maybe give us a go back in time to when you first got interested in the paranormal? How did you go from there to where you are now?
Okay, so
when did you become first interested?
When did I become first interested in the paranormal? Probably because of my mother. So I can remember being very young, maybe 5, 6, 7 years old. I'm very much aware that I'm looking at my mum's bookcase, and I can see books like The Uninvited by Clive Harold. I can remember the Bermuda Triangle being up there, the Philadelphia Experiment. Certain books like that were on that bookcase, and my mum would summarize what was in them. So I kind of like, it felt like there was more of a tapestry to this world than me going to school, really. And then when I was about probably 7 or 8 years of age, and my mum was sharing a story of her experiences when she was 12, and she had a ghost come to her in her bedroom, and her story about that. Actually, and again, a very subtle story where it was an old lady who would come in and would wipe the mirror and would dust the wardrobe and sit on the bed and ask her how she was, and then she would go out the bedroom door and leave. But of course, in the house is just her mum and dad, my grandparents, and her 4 brothers, and how that kind of influenced her to want to know more about the world herself. I got a book called Mystic Places by Reader's Digest, a massive kind of ornate. You might know it yourself. It's an ornate black book, silver pages, absolutely beautiful artwork in there. And being at school, and most people around me are reading Rupert, and there's me with Mystic Places, learning about the lost city of Z, just like Atlantis, and these entities and what happened over Fort Lauderdale with the time warp and stuff, and so that really opened my mind up to what was going on in the world, potentially what was being reported. So that kind of gave me a bit of a kind of insight, and I guess it led from there. Really, when I was a teenager, and I talk about this actually in one of my most recent podcasts. There was a newspaper because I live in Nottingham, right? So Nottingham has its legends like Robin Hood and all that kind of stuff. What happened with Oliver Cromwell and Henry, King Charles II, and so on. But Nottingham Castle, there was a story in one of the free newspapers up here, and it was Nottingham Recorder, and on the front cover, it's a story about vampires in Nottingham, right? Okay, and so I honestly, I wish I still had this newspaper, because I did keep it for a number of years. The newspaper report is the Nottingham City Castle and the Nottingham City Council employ a vampire hunter to go through the caves at night that are under the castle. And this guy is in his 70s, and he was looking for an apprentice to take over his role. You generally won't find it. I have looked.
Okay.
I have looked, and I had this newspaper for years, and I know I was just like, is it? So I had it, and I must have been about 13. Then when I was about 20, I decided to go to the council and I actually asked them about this. No, this role never existed. This never happened. And I'm like, did I not? Was that newspaper false? Was it like a Halloween thing? Was it like April Fools? I couldn't find it, and I physically can't find the edition. It was not even recorded newspaper, and that kind of led me to going. So vampires in Nottingham, and just odd stories.
Yeah. So how did that? But I mean, we do childish things. We read books when we're kids. How do you move from the bit where you go between your teenage years into your adulthood, where you're still chasing ghosties?
So I guess I found when you go through them phases where you're trying to discover who you are, and that's kind of the passions that you have. I found myself I had a number of good friends, and none of them shared the interest that I have. But I guess when I discovered the internet, probably when I was like maybe 17, 18, I discovered places online where people were reporting ghost stories. I found like Coast to Coast and so on. And I was like, actually, there's a tapestry out there, and I want to get involved. And then I found myself reading cases that were local. So I was then just following them up, going, hey, what happened here? And I've got a really kind of approachable personality. I love icebreaking with people. I don't generally have that issue where I can't not ask a question. So I found myself just talking to people in general, and people were very willing to share their stories, and I've been collecting them mentally, writing them down for many, many years. And then I found myself, I went along to an investigation. No, not an investigation night. I went along to a pub meeting where there was 3 people there that were presenting a number of ghost stories from the local area. And then from that point, I then joined that organisation because I seemed to know more than they did.
Yeah.
And then from there, we found ourselves with a medium in the group, and then we found press coverage, and then we had an office. And then from that point on, we bought an office, rented an office, and we literally had so many people coming to us. It was kind of odd, actually.
What was it
Yeah,
called? What was the group called? The
they
organisation
were called
called?
API. They were Amateur Paranormal Investigations, and that kind of expanded. And then I kind of wanted to do a ghost tour, but the ghost tour never really kind of stuck me because I think the ghost story really is about history. It's about mythology. It's about culture. It's about people. So I did the history, myths, ghosts, and legends tour, and it kind of covered all those things. And then the Nottingham Ghost Walk, that's run by Jenny and her partner. I know the people who run that. I know that I know those stories really, really well, and I know some of the stuff that goes in and around those locations. So I was able to provide essentially a tour.
Because
Better than
Nottingham
what
has
was.
got some wonderful hauntings there. Got a lot of great pubs.
It does. The pubs have many, many stories. In fact, my sister works at one of those pubs, so
Okay, so I
that always
remember I
helps.
went there. One of the first sort of ghost tours I went when I was in Britain. I went up to Nottingham with friends about 2011, I think. It was just
Yeah,
before Spooky Owls started. It was one of the things that pushed me to do Spooky Owls was having gone up there and looked at some ghosts. And there was the ye old trip to Jerusalem
yeah,
and different, some other pubs and the underground layers and
yeah.
like
Old
tunnels and stuff like
salutation.
that. A really cool place to go for ghosts. So you must. I mean, you've got your new Nottinghamshire series you've been doing on your channels. Can you
Yes,
tell us
yeah,
about that? What will people, if they go there, and can you maybe tell them how they can find these stories on you? I know you've got a couple of channels, so tell
yeah.
us
So
about that.
okay, so this kind of started, as you know, I do like the webinar production for ASAP.
We should go
So,
about that. Can you explain for people who don't know what ASAP is and what your role is in it?
okay, so the ASAP is the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena. I've been a member of that organisation since 2011. I believe I've met you at a couple of those
Yes,
conferences,
you have. Yep, yep.
and so from that point, in around 2000, I guess, during the word but we're not allowed to say began with a C, ended in a D. The virus of mysterious origins.
Yep.
Um, During that time, of course, ASAP's conferences they went online. From that point on, they kind of became a monthly conference, and then they kind of became a weekly event with a different guest every week, and they've been continuing until today, really, still going on. And there's one this evening.
Oh,
Um,
wonderful. But you were
I, I was going
asking
to say,
about the Nottinghamshire. We got through all
no,
that, but yeah.
this is very relevant. So one of the talks I gave a few months ago was about phenomenal Nottinghamshire. So really, it's a case of I really wanted to capture because, like you said, there Nottingham has a number of famous ghost stories. The problem is that there's actually a tapestry of cultural myths and kind of legends, ghost stories that kind of are more community based, of those kind of things that are happening out in the kind of the residential estates, um, and stories that are kind of not that well known. So I decided to create a webinar based on those things, and again from that developed in the case of I've got to wait 3 months because there's that many speakers for ASAP that I
Yeah.
decided to produce it as a 12-part podcast series. So these podcasts are, it's phenomenal Nottinghamshire. They're only 5 to 10 minutes, 2 stories on each, generally speaking, and they are designed to be bite-sized audio, so you can listen to it when you're on the loo, you can listen to it on your way to work, or in a nice tight space. It's well presented, it has an audioscape, and it's just designed to be really approachable. But every episode kind of covers a couple of stories that are not so well known outside of the famous ones like Lord Byron over at Amersley Hall and so on, and the trip to Jerusalem, and some of the ones that are kind of more grounded in the community. Like, and one of the very first story I covered is a poltergeist of Laurie Close. It's in a residential estate, and I go past this street every day on my way to work, and I see the house every time. What happened there was it was a couple. They had 3 kids, and in the 1990s they experienced poltergeist phenomena in this house. It got regional press coverage, but nothing national, nothing well known. The child, one of the girls who was like 12 at the time, her face got slapped. She was physically assaulted by this entity in the house, and it's one of those things where you're thinking, how come people don't know this? Generally speaking, and she saw a figure that she thought was Santa, and then it physically assaulted her. So it took this kind of trickster element to convince her in trust, and then struck her. And then the mother saw black wiry figures throughout the house, and again banging on the walls. The neighbours knew about this, and so Lomri Close is a locally famous case. Everyone in their close knows it. Many people would know it if they dug into Nottinghamshire's history, but no one beyond that is ever going to know this case. And there's little stories like that. There was one of a place called Deanwood Crescent where a Charles Hill back in 1968, had moved into a house, just him and his young daughter. So it's a single dad, young girl, and then he wakes one night and he finds there's a figure in his bedroom, and this figure is dressed in white, and it has a blue hat on. And he first describes it as looking like a Foreign Legion soldier with a kind of flap coming back from his neck, from the nape of his neck. And that he has a number of encounters with that in his bedroom. His daughter sees that one day on the stairs, runs upstairs, slams the door, poltergeist-like activity that's happening. And what happens is the council actually decides to rehouse them for the mental health of the child. And that's a really an interesting dynamic where he's gone to the council and gone, I need to move out. This is what's happening here. And they agree with him. The doctors agree with the family, but for the mental health of the child, that is to be rehoused. And what the story then evolves to another layer, where the neighbours reported that 19 years prior to that, there was a young man who lived at that house, and he was a painter decorator, who thus would wear white overalls, black and brown, blue jumper with white overalls over the top. He basically became injured, or he'd suffered. I think he fell from a ladder and was then unable to work. In the shame of that, this is the 1960s, of course. The shame of not being able to work or provide for your family, he committed suicide in the upstairs bedroom. And that's they feel is that who that gentleman is. And I went and I spoke. I knocked on the door of this house, and I was like, "Hey, are you aware of the history here? Would you like to tell you something?" Well, actually, something did happen here quite recently. I saw a person in white standing on the stairs, just walking, and I looked up and I was like, "Wait a minute!" I just saw someone turn the stairs at the top and looked like they were wearing white overalls. I said, "Well, are you aware of this story?" No, but now it makes sense. So that was quite an interesting element to that. So those kind of like residential stories, and plus there's some more fanciful ones like the Broccolo Boggin, which is a werewolf-like character who are out in the there's a village of Laxton in Nottinghamshire, which is like one of the last medieval open field systems of the country. And so it has like international recognition of all these different farmers that come over and want to know how this medieval open field system works of irrigation. And in this town, there's a gentleman who owns a museum. The guy's in his 90s now. I think he was 91, and he runs this local museum. And he was like, "Well, I can remember people here when I was a child telling me about ghost stories from the 1800s, and those accounts." And he, extra to his kind of farming interest, had kind of made a log of these accounts. And of course, I report about two of them in that Phenomenal Nottinghamshire episode.
Well, it obviously sounds fabulous. Where would people find this? What's the name of your channel? We'll put all the links, obviously, in all the bits where this is going to be available. But where can people find it?
Well, you'll find Phenomenal Nottinghamshire on all your social media platforms. It's hosted on Podbean. It's something I've tried new. I've not done that before. I've always been self-hosted previously. But you'll actually find it on Spotify, Amazon, Audible, Apple, and any
all
podcast
the places where we can be found as well. So that sounds good.
Really good.
I just want to quickly go back to just some of your thoughts from you, because obviously you were talking to real people that have experienced in their experiences, real paranormal phenomenon. What do you think, ultimately, from your experience? What is it all? What are we doing here? What's happening?
It's a good question, because I find myself almost going to and fro all the time, because I want desperately to be a believer. I think that's what it is. And because I want to be a believer, I'm more inclined to be open to these experiences are real. But the more I spend more time investigating it, the more I go, actually, it might just be pareidolia. It might just be a psychological situation. but there's something intrinsically interesting about these phenomena that seem to be linked in with like UAP phenomena, the kind of things that happen in and around that with ghosts and time slips. That seems almost like it's the same kind of phenomena. I find that to be so powerfully compelling that it makes me want to be a believer. So I find myself in this quandary in my mind all the time. I really don't know, but that actually is what keeps my interest.
So, well, that sounds fantastic. Well, thank you very much for talking to us today. Obviously, we could talk with a lot of people like yourself. I could sit here and talk hours and hours and hours about all your experiences. We'd love to get you back at some stage. But in the meantime, what's coming up for you, and where can people, what can people expect for you, coming up in the next couple of months on your podcasts?
Okay, so in terms of what you can get up to, if you go to my website, kristianlander.com, that's Christian with a K, on there you'll find the episodes of Phenomenal Nottinghamshire, and there's actually an attached article with all the pictures and the videos and stuff of those locations, as well as the audio version, so you can read it or you can listen to it. I've put out recently the Seriously Strange magazine for ASAP. I've got it edited over that. That magazine is currently available. I'm working on my next issue for them. So this is going to be a very physical edition. It's going to be a bumper edition. So we're talking like maybe 60 to 80 pages, something really kind of nice that you can get your hands around. I have a theme in mind. And the theme really, I wanted to focus around the UAP phenomena. And that really comes out of a number of conversations.
Tell people what UAP stands for.
Well, depending on where you live in the world, it's different, of course. We could just say it's anomalous phenomena, unidentified anomalous phenomena.
Yep.
Could be in the air, could also be under the water. Could also be moving through rock as well, but that's a different story in entire. So that I'm really interested in that. So I've been talking to Ash Ellis, I've been talking to Dave Hundrian from Bufog, from UFO Identified. A few characters over in the US I can't mention yet because they haven't acknowledged what their response is going to be. But really, to put a kind of something a bit more official together that can be absorbed by ASAP and thus the wider community of the paranormal on that particular topic. And because we haven't published too much on that, and I think that's a missing gap. So I'm going to attempt to fill that.
Well, it sounds like you've got a very much exciting couple of months coming up. I'm looking forward to seeing that magazine and just generally following all your travels, because if people go onto your YouTube channel, they can see wonderful videos, all sorts of different things of the things you've been going on. So, yeah, thanks very much, Kristian. Keep yourself warm, keep yourself dry, and we'll talk to you next time.
Dude, that sounds great, man. Thank you very much, man.
All right, thank you. See you all. Bye-bye.